Hi, I just finished recording the diary entry from 1906, today's diary entry from 1906, and now I'm back with one from the 26th. We're up to the 26th of December / 13th of December 1920. It's a Sunday. It is Monte Carlo, and Dimitri is staying at the Hotel de Paris. For whatever reason, he's not staying with his sister and brother-in-law at the Polovtsov's villa. My guess would be probably he wanted some independence of action. Maybe he thought he would be entertaining at some point. But at any rate, it would have been a huge expense for him. He was not doing well financially at that time. So I'm not sure how he could afford to stay at the Hotel de Paris, but he managed it, obviously. So these diary entries, of course, are always very much more complex than the ones from 1906. And I have some supporting material today. So I showed you this book before on the White Russian emigre community in Paris. And one of the topics that comes up in today's diary entry is the Sokolov investigation. So Sokolov was able to go into Yekaterinburg when the Bolsheviks had pulled out and do an investigation into what had happened to the imperial family. And then when he turned up in France, it just really lit a fire because there was a struggle for control of the documents and various items that he had gathered. And so I hold up this book in particular because it has such a good and such an interesting section in it on Sokolov. And honestly, there aren't that many really good sources on the Sokolov. And I mean, maybe there are now, but I had a friend who recently did a search on it, and he wasn't able to find much, really. And what he found was kind of unsatisfying. And one of the funny things is that in his diaries, Dmitri is one of the people who's really obsessed with the Sokolov materials and really very much wants to be the person who's put in charge of them. And he is, trying to make sure that other claimants, like Kirill in particular, would not succeed in getting that role for themselves. But the funny thing is that in none of the material that I have found on the Sokolov investigation and its aftermath, or in the sources that my friend has found, or in this book, is Dmitri ever mentioned. And unless he was delusional in the diaries, which I doubt because he's meeting with so many people, and he's meeting with Sokolov himself, he may have been delusional about whether or not people were taking him terribly seriously, but he surely wasn't delusional about the fact that he was one of the main players, that he was directly involved. So how that managed to fall between the cracks, I don't know. But if you read French and you really want an excellent account of the Sokolov investigation, in brief, of course, but specifically within the context of the Imperial Russian emigre community in France, then this is a good one, despite the fact that it leaves Dmitri out. So another person who's mentioned today is, we've met her in a previous diary entry. Did we? I can't remember, but I remember I was trying to pronounce her name anyway, is the ballerina Matilda Kshestinska. She was a ballet superstar in Imperial Russia, and she was the woman who was chosen by Alexander III to initiate his son, the future Emperor Nicholas II, into physical intimacy with a woman. And she then snagged herself two Grand Dukes who were both crazy about her, and she had a son with one of them, and we're not 100% sure whose son he was, but he was definitely a Grand Duke's son. Boy, did he look like a Romanov. Okay, so she and Dmitri were never a thing. I don't think Dmitri was wild about her. So this is a book written by my friend Corinne Hall on Kshesinska. Imperial Dancer, Matilda Kshesinska and the Romanovs. Excellent book. And really, if you want to read a book about Kshesinska, I think this is more or less the only game in town, and it's also a very good book. And so let's get some pictures from this book. I can show you some of the people who will be mentioned. All right, so here is Kshesinska and her son, who is the son of either Grand Duke Sergei Mikhailovich or Andrei Vladimirovich. I have a picture of her with Andrei. Well, there must be a picture of Andrei in here. I thought I had one marked out. All right, I'm not going to spend more time on it. Ah, it's right here. I didn't recognize him. 1940s. That is the two of them. And here, maybe you noticed, maybe you didn't. Who's that little guy? This must be right around 1906, later in the year. And you can see he's still small. He's 14, he may have been 15 by then. And he is still small for a man that would grow up to be well over 6 feet tall. And possibly that was because he was a 7-month baby. And so he was quite a bit premature and was tiny when he was born. Okay, so the one other book that I'm going to refer to today with some more information about the Polovtsovs that surprised me a little is my own PhD dissertation. And the title was, good Lord, I should have chosen a less complicated title because now it doesn't always flow off my tongue. Grand Ducal Role and Identity as a Reflection on the Interaction of State and Dynasty in Imperial Russia. So that was my specialty. And that how the state and the dynasty worked together or failed to work together, and specifically how the Grand Dukes were involved in that. And I'm thinking that I'm going to start doing a third video series on the Romanov dynasty without the focus on Dmitri and going all the way back to 1613. Maybe it will get more views than this series. It could scarcely get less. I hope that this is going to build some stream. It's going to build some strength. You know that it's going to get more viewers as we go along. We'll see. Maybe I'm the only person who finds Dmitri interesting enough to want to go through his diaries. All right, so let's get started. 26 December 1920, Sunday, Monte Carlo, Hotel de Paris. Maria came by in the morning and we took a little walk. The weather was ideal. I went to, okay, how am I going to handle these French names? Good Lord. Cap d'Ail, CAPD''AIL, to have lunch with Andrei. His greeting was remarkable, even too affectionate, and Malya could hardly contain herself. I had a short conversation with Andrei about Sokolov. Naturally, I told him exactly what I had done in Paris with respect to my desire to have the documents deposited in a bank. He approved of my ideas entirely. He talked about his letters to the Empress Maria Fyodorovna and said that he hadn't yet received any reply, a fact that doesn't at all surprise me. Our conversation was carried on in the friendliest of tones, and apparently for the time being, he's not saying or doing anything behind my back. I got back to Monte Carlo at 4:30 and had tea with Maria and the Polovtsovs at the Hotel de Paris. May, Papa Dominic, and Dolly came up to us, and we all went off to the casino. I won a little at the beginning, and then, of course, squandered my winnings. We dined at Saint-Romain, and I got home around 11 o'clock and went to bed. He's not keeping late hours at the moment. So Andrei and Malya are Grand Duke Andrei Vladimirovich and Kshesinska. She was called Malya by her inner circle. And Dmitri is always a little skeptical of them. He kind of thinks they're, what's the word? They're kind of lightweights. They're kind of flibberty-gibbets. I don't know. And especially Malya, he's wary of. So he's not sure how to react to this effusive greeting that he gets from both of them. Especially since, in relation to Sokolov, he had been told by friends in Monte Carlo that Andrei had been saying some really nasty things behind his back. So when he first heard that and noted it in an earlier diary entry, he was just incensed by it. And he'd gotten over it, apparently. So, and all of this tension was related to two things: to Kirill's claim to be the presumptive emperor, and to the Sokolov affair. And Dmitri and Andrei were more or less on the same page when it came to the Sokolov papers. They were more or less, Andrei, I don't think Dmitri is wrong in his feeling that Andrei basically approves of what Dmitri is suggesting, which is to take all of the papers and documents and put them in a bank vault in Paris, and that Dmitri would be the key holder, but that he wouldn't be doing anything with them, and that they would stay there until some decision could be made. And in fact, that's exactly what ended up happening. But Dmitri was not the key holder. So the Empress, the Dowager Empress, was in Denmark by then, Maria Fyodorovna, and since it was her son and daughter-in-law and grandchildren who'd been killed, she was the person who had the most legitimate right to these documents and these various other things. But she was refusing to receive Sokolov, to receive Dmitri, to receive anybody who wanted to talk to her about this, because she was very much in denial that her son had actually been killed. And she was believing the rumors that were going around that various people in Siberia had spotted Nicholas alive and undercover. And so she just wasn't going to touch this with a 10-foot pole. And so one of the strategies was, on Dmitri's part certainly, and I'm sure on other people's part as well, was to talk one of her daughters, Olga or Ksenia, one of the Tsar's sisters, into going to Mother and talking sense to her and prodding her into making some kind of decision about these papers. But as is noted here, apparently Andrei was one of the people who was writing letters to Maria Fyodorovna, and he wasn't getting any response, and that doesn't surprise me. I mean, there was never any love lost between the Vladimirovich branch of the family and the main branch of the family with Nicholas and Alexandra. Okay, so the Polovtsovs. Okay, so you know the Radzivills, you know about May Dubasova, and you know that Dmitri had a gambling problem, although in this instance he seems to have been under control. He squandered his winnings, but he did not go beyond that. So the Polovtsovs, Pete and Mimi are the ones that we're mainly dealing with here. because they're the couple, the friends that have come to Monte Carlo with Dmitri and his sister and brother-in-law. And Pete was a mentor to Dmitri and a close friend. Sasha, or Alexander, who was Mimi's husband, was also someone that Dmitri consulted with, although he didn't like him as much. But I had forgotten all about this in my dissertation, that one of the sources that was often used by historians doing an assessment of the Grand Dukes was the diaries of Andrei Polovtsov. They were published in Krasny Archiv, the Red Archive, volumes 3 and 4 in 1923, and then some more in 1932 and 1934. And so these were documents that were confiscated by the Bolsheviks. And even though it was probably risky and not generally acceptable to write about the Romanovs, there were people who were doing so, and of course they had to carefully couch it in really disparaging terms. But I get the impression that they were actually quite fascinated and that they were enjoying doing that. But whether that's true or not, Polovtsov's diaries were one of the things that would have been useful to them, because he was not talking in a favorable light about the Grand Dukes and their interference in the government, as he saw it. So it's a primary source that a lot of that Soviet scholars used in later years, especially the famous Soviet scholar Zayanchkovsky. I think his first name was Pyotr. And my point in my dissertation is that they rely too heavily on negative sources, sometimes on a single negative source, and they don't look at anything that might counter that. So what I wrote about Sasha Polovtsov is that he worked very closely with the chairman of the State Council, Grand Duke Mikhail Nikolaevich, during the reign of Alexander III. And his vindictive attitude toward the Grand Dukes is entirely in keeping with his period of activity during which Grand Dukes were trying to seize a place for themselves in government, thus emerging as powerful rivals to Russia's professional civil servants. All right, so there were a lot of Grand Dukes at that time. The dynasty at one point had almost gone extinct, but then there was this sort of Grand Ducal baby boom in the 19th century, and there were a lot of Grand Dukes, and some of them wanted serious roles for themselves. Dmitri would be one of those, although not yet. He hadn't even, he was still a tiny child or hadn't been born yet. So Polovtsov apparently was at odds with the Grand Dukes at that time during Alexander III's reign. And there were some of them who, in fact, Alexander III's brother, I fully sympathize with him on that, because they weren't the best of the best. Let's put it that way. Alexei was a dilettante in the Navy, and Vladimir was more or less a bon vivant, but they had very elevated ideas of himself. Sergei was absolutely a serious person, but in a rather sinister way. He had the inclinations of an authoritarian. All right, so come back for the next one, because all hell is going to break loose among this little group of people. Maria, Gulia, the Polovtsovs, and Dmitri. There's going to be a big explosion on the 27th. So I'll leave that as a cliffhanger and hope that you will come back and watch that. All right, bye.